So we start with the new coronavirus variant, Omicron, that was first reported by South Africa. Britain, Germany and Italy have detected cases as countries roll out travel restrictions. Israel has become the first country to ban the entry of all foreigners. The United States, Britain, the European Union and South Korea are among the countries and regions that are suspending or limiting travel from South Africa. Stock markets on both sides of the Atlantic have suffered the biggest falls in more than a year. Oil prices have also experienced the biggest single-day slump since the early days of the pandemic. There are also worries that the travel bans would hurt tourism and further the economy. Michael Voss has more.
More flight disruptions just as the world was gearing up for mass travel over Christmas. Now travellers are stranded at Johannesburg Airport, wondering when they'll be able to leave.
I'm not happy with the situation because I booked my flight on time. Everything was on time. Now I'm inconvenienced because I had to be at work tomorrow, but then they cancelled the flight.
South Africa has called the travel bans draconian, while the World Health Organization suggests it's unlikely to stop the new virus spreading, and new cases are already being seen outside of Africa. But much of Europe is going through a fourth wave of infections and feels it needs to act.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly, decisively and united. The European Commission has today proposed to Member States to activate the emergency brake on travel from countries in southern Africa.
Britain has recorded more than 50,000 new cases a day, though hospital admissions and deaths are not rising as fast. Apart from the travel ban, there are no new restrictions planned here. Many other European countries, though, are cracking down. The Netherlands has the toughest new rules, announcing a strict 12-hour curfew.
Van aanstaande zondag.
With effect from Sunday, November 28th, everything in the Netherlands will in principle be closed between 5 o'clock in the evening and 5 o'clock in the morning. Theatres, cinemas, hairdressers and event halls. I could go on.
The news, though, was met by noisy demonstrations. It's a problem many EU governments face, with protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations. The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news of the new Omicron variant, with stock markets in Europe and the US suffering their biggest falls in more than a year. Just how dangerous this new variant is remains unknown. The rush is now on to determine if it's more infectious, causes more severe outcomes, or is resistant to current vaccines. It could take several weeks before the results are in. Michael Voss, CGTN.
South Africa has complained it's being punished instead of applauded for detecting the new COVID variant, Omicron. The country's foreign ministry made a statement as a number of countries announced the travel restrictions from South Korea. It says the bans are akin to punishing South Africa for its advanced genomic sequencing and the ability to detect new variants quicker. Less than 2 months after being removed from Britain's red list, South Africa is back on it. The country's government and the tourism sector have called this temporary ban a knee-jerk reaction. Yolisa Njamela has more from Johannesburg.
The news of the temporary ban has been met with shock by the government and the tourism sector here in South Africa.
It is not just a huge setback, it's disastrous, it's catastrophic. The implications go way beyond the supposed temporary banning of flights, commercial and private flights between South Africa and the United Kingdom. This is now spread like wildfire, and almost on an hourly basis we're getting updates of more and more countries that are closing their borders for travel between South Africa and themselves. And whilst one was speaking of temporary, you know, we're going to have a medium to long-term damage to our brand, which is devastating, and the timing couldn't be worse. We are about to enter what is deemed to be our peak season.
The tourism industry is still trying to recover from the previous travel ban to South Africa. South Africa's Department of International Relations says the UK's decision is premature and seemingly rushed, as even the World Health Organization is yet to advise on the next steps. The Association of Southern African Travel Agents agrees.
At the end of the day, this isn't about this variant having been, should I say, started in South Africa. The fact of the matter is it was our laboratories who were the first to identify this variant. Why? Because we have some of the best laboratory testing in terms of viruses and strains in the world. So the fact of the matter is this virus could have started anywhere. We were just the first to identify it. This is the first point. Therefore, the placing of restrictions on South African travel makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
The International Relations Department has issued a statement saying the government has already started engaging with all the countries that have imposed a travel ban with a view to persuade them to reconsider. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
For more reactions in the Asia-Pacific region, let's talk to our correspondents Greg Navarro in Sydney, Ann Chan in Hong Kong and Lu Siray in Beijing. Let me start with you, Greg. You're in Sydney right now. Health officials in Australia's most populous state, New South Wales, have kicked off urgent testing. Tell us more about the country's situation in terms of control and prevention.
That's right. Nearly 30 passengers arrived on separate flights yesterday here in Sydney from several South African countries. Two, as you mentioned, tested positive. Urgent genomic sequencing is underway to determine whether those two passengers, in fact, have the Omicron variant. Now, also, health officials had to work through the night to contact all the passengers on those planes. They are now, we're told, isolating, spending 14 days in specialized facilities while they quarantine there. Yesterday, states and territories across the country issued new border restrictions in response to this new variant that the World Health Organization is referred to as a variant of concern. And as we've talked about, there are some questions about whether it's more transmissible than the Delta variant, and current vaccines may be less effective. Some of those new restrictions include, at least here in New South Wales, anybody arriving from overseas, regardless of their vaccination status, has to isolate for at least 72 hours. Other states and territories are looking at further restrictions as a result of all this. We should tell you, too, that in the Northern Territory, urgent genomic sequencing is underway as well after a passenger from a Southern African country tested positive. They're trying to determine again if it's that new variant. Here in New South Wales, health officials said it is inevitable that we will get new strains of this virus that's going to happen. All of this, though, raises into question what will happen next month, the middle of December, when here in New South Wales, we're supposed to see a further easing of restrictions. Very few are in place. Those easing of restrictions will include taking away restrictions for people who are not vaccinated and pretty much taking those mask mandates in most settings and scrapping those as well.
Thank you very much. Our correspondent Greg Navarro in Sydney. Now let's go to Ann Chan in Hong Kong. And we know the city has reported 2 cases of the Omicron variant. Are those 2 cases in treatment right now?
Well, Hong Kong, as you mentioned, currently has 2 confirmed cases of the Omicron variant, which is also known as the B.1.1.529. In response to this, the government has further tightened the city's travel and quarantine measures. For one, vaccinated residents traveling from Hong Kong from 8 African countries must now spend their first week of mandatory quarantine at Penny's Bay Quarantine Center, which is the city's only quarantine facility. Those African countries include South Africa, Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Mozambique, Malawi, Namibia, and Zimbabwe. And then at Penny's Bay, these people will then have to go through daily testing every day for the 7 days that they're there. And then they'll complete the remainder of their quarantine at a quarantine hotel, which is another 2 weeks. Meanwhile, non-Hong Kong residents who've been in those 8 African countries in the past 21 days of boarding their flight are banned from entering the city, while unvaccinated residents from those places aren't allowed into the city as well. Now, because the Omicron variant has been detected in other places like Israel and Belgium, the government has also contacted health authorities there to facilitate further risk assessments. And it's not just Hong Kong enacting those travel curbs. Other places and countries are also doing the same for those traveling from Hong Kong. So, for example, Russia has barred non-citizen travelers from Hong Kong from entering into its country, and that's in effect starting today. For Switzerland, those flying in from Hong Kong must present a negative COVID test and be in quarantine for 10 days. Officials in the Philippines are also contemplating a ban on travelers from Hong Kong. And meanwhile, Pakistan has placed a complete ban for everyone traveling from Hong Kong. But even though neighboring Macau has started to bar civilian aircrafts from carrying people who've traveled in the past 3 weeks to 8 African countries like South Africa and Botswana, Hong Kong is spared for now.
What about the city's residents? Will there be more measures on control and prevention in the city in the near future?
Sure. Officials say they've stepped up surveillance on designated quarantine hotels to ensure that they comply with infection control requirements at all times, because the variant is suspected to have spread by airborne transmission at such a hotel. Next week, the government is also going to deploy vaccination vehicles to help increase the city's vaccination rate. So these are mobile trucks where people can get vaccinated in. The vehicles will first focus on public housing and then they will head to school. So instead of the people having to go to vaccination centers to get vaccinated, people can then have these vehicles come to them, which is more convenient. Secretary for Civil Service Patrick Nip has said in an interview with media that authorities must definitely look into the idea of a vaccine passport for the public, and more details on that will be announced in due course. So what this means is that public places like restaurants may segregate those who are vaccinated and those who aren't. And Patrick Nip has explained that if people don't get their jabs and it's not because of medical reasons, it ends up impacting others who then have to pay for the consequences. As of early this week, 70% of Hong Kong has been vaccinated with the first dose, and this rate was the initial target. But the Secretary for Civil Service says it's not enough. He believes that 80% and above needs to be reached if Hong Kong wants to reopen its borders with the Chinese mainland and internationally. So also echoing those sentiments is Executive Councillor Bernard Chen. He says the vaccination rate needs to keep increasing in order to reopen borders. Otherwise, it's difficult to revive Hong Kong's economy. And he's also said that other places and countries outside of Hong Kong realize that in order to solve the pandemic problem, people need to get vaccinated. So their policies are all headed towards vaccine passports as well. Back to you.
Thank you very much, our correspondent Ann Chan in Hong Kong. Now we go to Lu Siray in Beijing. Siray, we know the Chinese mainland has not reported any cases of Omicron so far, but what does this new variant mean for China's overall pandemic response strategy?
So there's a growing concerns over Omicron, a new COVID variant that was first reported in South Africa. And the current classification has put Omicron in the most dangerous category, and research has also shown that it has many same mutations that are found in Delta, Alpha, and Beta. But there are other mutations alarmed that it might be more transmissible, serious, and reinfect people more than the Delta variant. Some experts say it's still too early to tell if any of such fears about Omicron could be true, and it may take another week or so to see. But just as you mentioned, many countries now are racing to ban the flights from and to South Africa, even though they have been hoping to coexist with the virus. And the emergence of the new variant has also caused concerns over whether the existing vaccine will still work to fight against the pandemic. China's Sinovac earlier says it will start developing new vaccine against Omicron as soon as possible. And another Chinese medical company says it can accurately detect Omicron variant with its current technology. And also Zhong Nanshan, China's top respiratory therapist, say the vaccines now are still strong enough to protect people, so getting vaccination or the booster shot is still necessary. And others say if the vaccines prove to be ineffective to Omicron, detecting infected cases and control them before curing, or the COVID-0 strategy would be the only solution, because Omicron is showing that more serious mutations could be developed later to replace it. Take a listen.
First of all, the appearance of the Omicron variant has fully shown that China's combating COVID-19 strategy, that is the zero clearing strategy, is scientific and right. The appearance of the Omicron variant will not influence dramatically China's strategy.
And also, China's CDC says if China have adopted the strategy to coexist with the virus, the country would witness around 630,000 new cases per day on average. And China has been implementing very strict rules in detecting and containing the infected cases. In the past 1 year, the country has kept the COVID cases to a very small number. Although this has also cost hugely in manpower and economically, the environment is believed by its people to be safe enough to continue their life without much concerns. But on the other hand, people are getting exhausted and frustrated about the fact that they have to register almost everywhere they go, even if it was just with a scan of a QR code. And recently, some resurging cases proved to be linked to Delta variant has alarmed Chinese people to stay vigilant. And the emergence of Omicron would only remind them to hang on even for a longer time. Back to you, Pandeng.
Thank you very much. Our reporter Lu Siray in Beijing. Meanwhile, several airlines say they will not change routes to South Africa following travel restrictions announced by the White House. There have been no cases of the new Omicron variant detected in the United States as of yet. But as Kate Fisher reports, health officials in the US say it's only a matter of time.
No cases detected here in the US as yet. But the White House's senior advisor on the coronavirus pandemic, epidemiologist Dr. Anthony Fauci, saying that he would not be surprised if it is here already. It is simply so highly transmissible. He says invariably it will get to the United States, if not the rest of the world. The governor of the state of New York has already decided to declare a state of emergency there, even though there are no cases as yet in her state. She's saying that the cold weather surge as people gather indoors more, as well as the threat of this new variant, has led to that decision. Despite those restrictions on travel to and from South Africa, Delta and United airline companies here in the US say they will not be changing their schedules. They will still fly to and from South Africa, despite the White House's decision to restrict travel there. The president is being briefed, we're told, about updates on this, and his coronavirus response team and the senior health officials in the administration are monitoring the updates, and we're told they're also speaking to their colleagues across the world. Kate Fisher, CGTN, Washington.
Our next report explains what we know and what we don't know so far about the new variant.
The WHO said the earliest known case of the Omicron variant was November 9th when a specimen was collected, and South Africa first reported it to the health body on November 24th. Studies show Omicron has more than 30 mutations on the spike protein, which is the part the virus uses to get into the cells it attacks. That is double the number associated with the Delta variant. South African medics said Omicron cases have so far appeared primarily in young people, leaving them exhausted and with body aches and soreness. The WHO also said Omicron may spread more quickly, and early evidence suggests an increased risk of reinfection. Scientists also stressed that there is still a lot we don't know about Omicron, including whether it is indeed more contagious, whether it causes more severe cases, or its effect on vaccine efficacy.